And is to come, be almighty. Amen. Amen. So as warm as it's been for the last few days, I don't know about you, but it's jarring to me to hear the text say, and it was winter. Like, wait a minute, what? My head just gets all twisted around with that. But it's winter in John, in the text that we have, and he tells this little story. And it may seem somewhat familiar. It may seem like, oh yes, it's one more of those times where people are questioning Jesus and, hoping that he'll reveal himself or, give them the edge to know what's really going on in his ministry. But there's more going on here in this passage, and I want to try to break it down. Now, I wrote this all out, and I had notes, and I had them in the pulpit, and I was using that at 8 o'clock. I'll tell you why later, but I did that, and I messed it up. So I'm going without notes, and so hopefully I won't mess it up nearly as bad. So it's an interesting day when you start off with notes and you still make flubs. So here's the thing. I want to start with just that interesting location that John talks about, because as you know, in John's gospel, he's really high on metaphor. He's big on it. Lots and lots and lots of metaphor, where Jesus is a bread, Jesus is door, Jesus is gate, Jesus is the good shepherd, and so forth. So to begin a passage, it was the Feast of Dedication, it was winter, Jesus was in the Solomon's portico in the temple, which is this little porch area. It's kind of on the east side. He's strolling around, and there are people there gathered for this Feast of Dedication, and I just think that's an important little detail. The Feast of Dedication, you probably don't, off the top of your hand, know what that's about. But if I say to you, Hanukkah, you know something about what it's about, right? Hanukkah, that's in fact what it is. It's Hanukkah. And Hanukkah means, it's the commemoration of a military revolt in about the year 194 BC, where the Israelites drove away the Syrian army. The Syrians had come and conquered Jerusalem. They had taken over the temple, kind of roughed the place up a bit, sacrificed to other gods on the altar. Figuring out, you make kind of a, squeamy face, right, make the squeamy face. They desecrated the holy space, the place where God dwells, right? In Israelite theology, this is the temple, the place where God's spirit and presence is. And other people were in it, mocking God and using the temple profanely. So they were driven out, and they were victorious, and they rededicated the temple to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's the Feast of Dedication, one of the elements celebrated and recognized in Hanukkah. So that's interesting to me. So if you think about holidays for you and me, and we gather together, and you kind of always have in the back of your mind, something of that day going on. So like today, for example, is Mother's Day. So what do you have rolling around in the back of your mind, maybe? Mom, right? Mm-hmm. You're thinking about mom and motherhood, and those who have been a mother to you through the years, those surrogate mothers, on and on. Your mind just kind of goes there because that's the day we decided it is, right? So here they are in the temple with this celebration beginning, and they're thinking about military victory, right? They're thinking about, remember that time? That was such a rout. We got the temple back. We rededicated it. God is with us again in this holiness. So that they're thinking about, the reclaiming of their identity as God's people, as much as this military rout that happened. So now, hear the question that they asked Jesus. Now that you have the background, listen again to the question. Will you tell us plainly, are you the Messiah or not? Keep us in suspense. What is it they're actually asking him? Are you going to throw out Rome, just like we threw out the Syrians 200 years ago? Are you that kind of a guy? Are you that kind of Messiah? Just tell us plainly. They're asking him, is he a military leader? Is he going to save the nation from the other nation, the Romans in this case? Fair enough. enough. Except that Jesus does what he does, this kind of interesting, I always do this judo move, where he reframes the whole discussion. So first of all, he says, I've told you and you don't believe. I've done all these things in my Father's name, works, miracles. You don't believe. So as if to say, I'm not going to tell you again. But then he says something interesting to me. He says, my sheep know my voice. Now, if you go back in John 10, just before this little passage where they're walking around in the portico of Solomon, Jesus has given a whole teaching on the good shepherd. The good shepherd, the one that lays down his life for the sheep. You remember this passage. I am the good shepherd, Jesus says. So he's still tying in this, Jesus has sheep on his mind, and they have conquest on their mind. And I think that's an interesting contrast, because Jesus' kingdom doesn't look at all like a military victory. It's in a different realm entirely. He uses the sheep and shepherd to describe what God is doing. My sheep know my voice. They hear it and they follow me. You're not of my sheep. It's kind of a biting. I mean, if that feels biting, it should. You're not of my sheep. Now, they don't care about him, so maybe it's not that biting for them. They're like, whatever. Now you're talking about sheep, whatever. But then he says, nothing will take them out of my hand. And it repeats, doesn't it? In the next phrase, he says, my Father has given me the greatest gift anybody could ever get, and nobody is going to take it out of his hand. So he says it twice in almost the same breath. Now, I find that interesting, and I think it has to do with the temple. And the word snatch there, I don't know what it is in Greek, but it's interesting that the word snatch, as though Jesus is saying, the temple was snatched. But what I'm here to do has nothing to do with brick and mortar and taking property and getting it back and military conquest and strategy. It has to do with souls. It has to do with people. People who hear my voice and they follow me. And I give them the greatest gift anybody could get, eternal life. A military victory in whatever situation that, whatever that's about, it's not about eternal life. What I'm here to be about is eternal life. And no one can snatch that out of my hand. No one can snatch it out of the Father's hand. It's on a whole different level. And I imagine when he says the Father and I are one, their mind just went, like, what? That's heresy. It's heresy. Saying he's God? He's one with God? What? Well, that's John's gospel. That's what John wants us to understand and believe, that Jesus is claiming that divinity dwells within him, and he and the Father are one. And nothing can snatch us, or snatch the sheep, I should say, out of his hand. Now that's important to think about further, where you expand on this, just think more about sheep. And, they're vulnerable, they're out there in the field, and things can come get them. And they're very prone to wander, nibble their way to the edge where it's no longer safe for them, right? So we have Psalm 23, that beautiful poem of David that talks about being led to still water and to green pastures, and my enemies are taken care of, and it's just this beautiful relationship of caring and safety and provision, right? Jesus is saying to them, the kind of Messiah I am is about caring and safety and provision and eternal life. It's not about being a new revolutionary military leader. We're going to throw the Romans out and start a new empire, because that's what was hoped for. Wouldn't you hope for that? If you were under an oppressive regime, you'd hope somebody would come in there and change things. And Jesus is there to change things. But you see, he does it in that way that only he can do. Changes the question around. It's not about military conquest. It's about the saving of a soul, of uniting with the God who created you, who loves you, who sustains you. Remember, he had just given this sermon to the disciples and said to them, the good shepherd is the one who lays down his life for his sheep. That's the kind of Messiah that Jesus is. That's the kind of shepherd that he is talking about. So I, in my mind, imagine, how could they have heard this? It must have just been very jarring for them. Maybe as jarring as thinking about winter in the middle of springtime. But that's an interesting thing to speculate on. How did they receive this? And in John's gospel, it often leaves you just hanging. You don't really know how they respond to it. Some probably thought, well, that is very interesting, and other people probably just went, he's a loony. But the real question is what you and I think about it. That's the real question. What do you think about this idea that Jesus is the shepherd, and you and I are the sheeple? We hear his voice and we follow. We hear his voice and we follow. And that may seem vague, and so let me put teeth in it. How do we hear his voice? Well, we read the scriptures, and if you pore over the Gospels enough, you begin to have a real sense of Jesus' character, of what moves him in his life, and it's people in their suffering and in their pain, and he comes to them in that point of deepest need and brings healing. To hear his voice is to care for neighbor. To hear his voice is to care for enemy. And to follow then means what? It means to act. It means to live your life after the manner that Jesus has lived. To hear his voice and then to follow. Now, I'm bold enough to think that everybody here wants to do that. And most days I want to do that. But I'm here to tell you there are days when it's not so much. It's a struggle internally, where I'm not real keen. I would rather listen to my own voice, actually. So there we go back to Psalm 23. It's this funny little line in there that always gets me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Now, I think that's wishful thinking on David's part. If you understand how shepherding goes, the shepherd has a stick, a crozier, a staff, whatever it is, and they use it to whack the sheep. When the sheep, you get a little bump on the backside to go where you need to go, right? So for David to say, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Well, that's an amazing thing to say, because I wouldn't find it very comforting. I don't, in fact, find it very comforting. I find it necessary for God's voice to intervene and to say, that's not who I've asked you to be. Who have I asked you to be? And it's just that still small voice inside that kind of, it's your conscience that kind of rises up, usually after the fact. Sorry, Lord. And then, some days it feels like a holy 2x4 and not a little step. But that's what it means to hear his voice and to follow. It means it's not just a head trip, an intellectual argument about God on earth. It's about a relationship in which God's voice and spirit speak on the inside and nudge you, ever so gently. Sometimes not so gently, but usually ever so gently. Just come this way, with the idea that if we listen and we follow, that all the abundant and everlasting life that he's talking about in this passage is ours now and in the time to come. It's not just eternal life like, someday we'll float off into heaven or something. Where we go after we die. Those are interesting questions, but it's all that, eternal life then and now. That you can sing that song we just sang, when peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll. Whatever my lot, Whatever thou hast taught me to say, it is well, it is well, it is well with my soul. You could only do that when you're hearing the shepherd's voice inside. When you believe what's being said here, that Jesus is offering a messiahship that is very, very different than, one, their expectations, and two, really probably even their desires. And it's better. It is forever. And it is beautiful and wondrous to behold. So what do you think about that? That's the question of my challenge to you, your homework this week. What are the ways in which you actively listen for the shepherd's voice? What are the ways that you can identify in your own life that you follow? Do you get interrupted in your inner life, in the little inner dialogue going on? Ooh, I should have said that. Ooh, I need to go back to that person and apologize. Or, that person really needs me right now. I think I'm going to go and give them a word of encouragement. You know what I'm talking about? That little voice that just, it's easy to ignore, especially if you're busy. What are the ways in which God speaks to you, the Good Shepherd, leading you, calling you forward? It's a beautiful image here, both pastoral and, because it's eternal, it's a power that no power on earth can match. There's no greater power than eternal life. Being talked to here by this person who is the very author of life itself. And they don't hear that. They've dismissed it, probably. How do you hear his voice? And how do you follow?